Hi folks, Jason Webster here, lead commercial agronomist for Precision Planting. Welcome to this episode of Inside PTI. Today we're going to talk about uniform corn emergence. Now, as corn farmers, we love to plant corn, and when that corn comes up out of the ground, we love to see that picket fence stand of corn. We also love to see all of our corn coming up even, a uniform stand where every corn plant comes up at the same time. We're trying to measure this at the PTI farm. If we don't get uniform emergence, what kind of yield loss could be associated from that delay? To do this measuring, we have a flag testing program at the PTI farm where we'll plant corn, we'll give it about 100 to 110 heat units, and that corn just ought to be poking up out of the ground. And when that happens, our team is there with a series of flags. We'll flag those first plants up out of the ground. We are then going to come back every 12 hours, 12, 24, 36, 48, and 48 plus to document and flag any late emergers that come up in any of those 12-hour periods. And if you come to the PTI farm in the springtime, you'll see some of our flag testing trials, and you'll just see thousands and thousands of flags out in the field. And this is documenting the difference or delay in emergence based on the treatments that we're putting in the field. Now, I mentioned measuring earlier. We've got all this documentation. We've got all these corn plants documented of when they came up delay-wise. And our goal is to take it to yield and figure out if a corn plant comes up later, if there's a delay in emergence, does it cost us corn yield? And the answer to that is yes. This is data from the PTI farm from 2020 to 2023, where we've looked at every 12-hour delay in emergence, and we've calculated the yield losses. Now, from the time that first corn plant comes up out of the ground, my expectation is that within 12 hours, all of the other corn plants will also be up out of the ground. I say that because once we get past a 12-hour delay, now we're at 24 hours, that's where we start picking up some yield losses at 8% loss. We then get out another 12 hours, now we're at 36 hours delay, and this is where we start seeing some big numbers. This is where we're giving up about a third of the corn crop. Another 12-hour delay to 48, we're losing 69% of yield, and anything later than 48 is about a train wreck at 80% yield losses. So we've measured, we've documented when corn comes up uneven, it gives us yield loss. So now the question at hand is, how are we going to fix it? How are we going to get uniform corn emergence? As we think about running that corn planter, what are some things that we can do to make sure this corn comes up even? And one of the things I want to talk about today is seed orientation. And I think this is really important. As a grower, how many corn kernels do you plant in a season? Obviously, it depends on how many acres you farm, but chances are you're planting millions or billions of kernels of corn each season. And if someone came to you and said, if you could plant the seed, position the seed, or orient the seed in the trench any way you could, how would you orient it to get the corn to come up as fast as possible to give you even emergence? What would your answer be? Well, this is what we've been asking ourselves at the PTI farm and trying to measure this. And I guess to answer this question, I do think it's important to think about the corn kernel's composition. Now on the screen, you will see a picture of a flat corn kernel. And you're going to hear me talk about the tip of the corn kernel as we go out through this conversation. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the tip of the corn kernel. And the tip is where the kernel was actually attached to the ear during the growing season. Another important corn kernel part, if you will, is the embryo or the germ. Now, the embryo is only on one side of the corn kernel, and this is a pretty important part of the corn kernel. This is the part of the embryo that's going to imbibe water. When you put that corn kernel in the trench and you give it good seed to soil contact, that embryo is going to imbibe water from the soil, and the corn kernel is going to start to germinate. Now, when this whole thing happens, we want to look at the orientation of the seed. On the picture here, I've got two corn kernels. One is tip down and the other is tip up. Let's talk about the corn kernel on the left. And if we would take a corn kernel and plant it tip down in the furrow, here's how the germination process works. Again, that embryo, which you'll see in the middle of that corn kernel, it's going to imbibe water. It's going to start to swell and it's going to start to germinate. That 𝗠𝗄𝗯𝗃, pictured on the screen, is going to start to grow upward. My question to you is that the right direction to get this corn plant up out of the ground? Yeah, it's growing up to get to the soil surface. That is the correct direction. Now, on the other hand, let's flip this thing around, take that corn kernel, and we got that furrow. Let's plant it tip up. That corn kernel's embryo, or the germ, will imbibe water from that good seed to soil contact. It's going to swell, it's going to start to germ, but that 𝗠𝗄𝗯𝗃 is going to grow straight down. That's the fastest way to get this corn kernel up out of the ground? No, it's actually fighting gravity and growing the wrong direction. And this is where I always say, when the good Lord made a corn plant or a corn kernel, the guy was having a pretty good day, because this corn kernel will figure it out. It'll say, hey, wait a minute, I'm growing the wrong direction, and it will simply do a U-turn. Now, it's good that the corn kernel figured it out, but what's the problem with this? It's time and it's vigor. And when this happens in cold, wet conditions, this can be a real problem, and a lot of times will cause a delay in corn emergence, okay? So the flag testing that we do at the farm, if you do this on your farm, if you see some late emergers, dig some of these plants up and see how they fell in the furrow, and see if they were positioned tip up or tip down, and see what the differences are on your farm. But, very rarely in life do things happen the same way 100% of the time, all the time. And ladies and gentlemen, the way a corn kernel germinates is the same. The parts and pieces are the same, and this is the way it's going to germinate. It's going to happen every single time. And I think growers need to be aware of this as seeds are being positioned in the furrow. Now, we've got interns at the farm. We got an army of interns that work at the PTI farm in the summertime. And what we do is we simulate demonstrations. We hand plant corn. We bring our planter in, we make the furrow, but we raise the closing system up. And that's when our interns come in, and they've got a protocol of how to plant corn kernels in the trench or in the furrow. And some kernels are planted tip down, some are tip up, some are to the right, some are to the left, some are embryo flat with facing up, some are down, all kinds of different combinations. But point being, we manually plant these seeds in the trench, and that gives us the ability to go to the field and measure. I've tried to teach some of the interns what we're trying to accomplish, and to do this, we'll bring aluminum pans in, and we'll put a mix of good black soil and sand together, and we will manually plant corn kernels tip down and tip up, and we will watch the timing of these corn plants coming up out of the ground. And you can see on the picture here, some of the demonstrations that we've seen have just been unbelievable in looking at the difference in emergence timing. Planting corn kernels tip down is definitely the fastest way to get corn up out of the ground. And if we could do this on every single kernel, that might help us give us that uniform corn emergence that we're talking about here today. But obviously, a big difference in emergence timing in this photo, tip down versus tip up. And so what does this all mean? So I mentioned earlier, we're out flagging every 12 hours, and it has been interesting to look at tip down versus tip up placement or orientation in the furrow. When we manually, our interns plant seeds, corn kernels, tip down in the furrow, we see a 12-hour emergence factor at 99%. This is data from 2024, this past year. And those are incredible numbers. When we take that corn kernel and we just flip it all the way around backwards, okay, and we've got tip up, our 12-hour emergence gets delayed by 10%. And now we're down to 90% 12-hour emergence. So it just stands to reason with the parts and pieces of a corn kernel, the way we orient the seed in the trench, if we plant it tip down, it is the fastest way to the soil surface. If we position it backwards, it's got to do a U-turn, and it simply takes time in order for that to happen and get that corn kernel up out of the ground. And again, I'll go back to our yield data. If this happens, we position the seed the wrong way and it comes up later, now we're in a situation where we can talk about some of these losses that we're giving up, 30, 60, or even 80% of yield when this happens. So today we are just measuring. We're trying to figure out the problem. Okay, if we position a seed in the trench a certain way, can it give us yield increase? Right now, we're hand planting to measure this. We're hand harvesting to measure this. But right now, we're seeing some really good numbers. So more of the story is this. Right now, we're just measuring. We can't, with a planter, drop the seed in any certain way. We're doing it by hand. Okay, we're planting the corn by hand, and we're measuring yield by hand. But we're in the investigative process to see what kind of advantages this could be. We've talked about some of the yield losses. As you're planting this spring, think about your scouting schedule of how you're going to come in and do flag testing every 12 hours. If you do that and you see late emergers, dig some of these seeds up and see how they were positioned in the trench. You might be surprised.